All right, we're live.
Welcome to the live stream. I'm Doreen Marshall. I'm the Vice President of Mission Engagement at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And we're here to talk today about protecting your mental health during the time of coronavirus. I'm joined by Jackie Padilla from NowThis.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this is a great weekly event, weekly conversation that we've been having. We've been getting so much feedback from both of our audiences about getting real with mental health, talking about the things that we're all being challenged with. I know both of us are streaming from our homes right now. And last week we talked about coping and releasing some of the stress that comes with our mental health and all the anger or sadness or overwhelming feelings we might be experiencing. And this week, what I really want to talk about is how do we kind of cope with the things that are out of our control, the things that are unknown, right? I think we've seen so many events get canceled and things that we were looking forward to, get delayed, and just see all these halts that are just completely out of our control. So my first question is, how do we handle that? How do you handle that sense of things just not working in your favor and there's nothing you can do about it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question. And I think the challenge we all have right now is about staying in the moment, right? And trying not to anticipate disappointment, but realizing that we are having things change, be canceled, and it's okay to have feelings about that. Since we've been in sheltered in place, I've attended a wedding via Zoom, birthday parties. My daughter attended a bat mitzvah. So, these are events that are happening in people's lives, certainly not the way any of us planned. But I think what I'm finding is that if we can have an appreciation for what is able to continue right now, knowing that this is not ideal for any of us. But it's okay to feel disappointed. I think the other thing that I'm finding is that people are connecting differently now that we all have this kind of level playing field of having to use technology, right? So if you imagine if you went to a party, it might be hard to engage somebody in conversation, or you might not know which group to start talking to. Technology kind of levels that for us. So I think it's been interesting to see how we've figured out new ways of connecting and being together.
I was joking with you earlier that it's that phrase, fear of missing out. And it's, maybe not the ideal phrase, but it's kind of true. There's so many people who have this weird buildup of anxiety of, well, what's going to happen in the fall? What's going to happen? Should I be planning that vacation? Should I cancel that trip? Should I, try to shoot for that job opportunity and apply for a new position? Everything's just this giant question mark. So how do you even cope with things that you can't even predict? And in traditional life, we might be able to predict and have a general timeline, but that concept of time, for at least for me, is kind of non-existent. So how do you tackle that and come to terms with, you just got to let things go?
Yeah, no, I wrote a whole blog about this idea of kind of dealing with uncertainty, and that's what we're dealing with, right? We don't know if the events we have planned for the fall will resume or resume in the same way or differently. And I think a big piece of that is kind of our struggle to kind of sit with what's unknown. And what I'm often mindful of is that people often, like, it's what we think we know is going to happen that we try to plan for, but life has a way of kind of taking interesting bounces. I think for example, in December, I don't think any of us thought that in April this would be our scenario, right? So, but what I also try and remind people of is to also be hopeful, that just like you can't predict whether things will be, you know, more or less than they are right now, there's a possibility they'll be different but better. And that's the piece I try and remind myself of, that while this isn't ideal, this isn't what we had planned, but that doesn't mean what's coming will necessarily be worse in terms of our social lives or activities. It's just going to be different.
And how do you make those moments, that, that virtual happy hour or that virtual wedding, all of these pretty significant moments in people's lives with just interacting with other humans feel legitimate. I think sometimes, we need that tangible hug or that present or a dance or something to make it feel like it's significant and a big milestone. So how do we get that same gratification, like how we're doing right now, webcam to webcam?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a couple things. I think managing our own expectations about that. So if you imagine that your, wedding is going to translate exactly via Zoom or via a FaceTime platform or something, it's not going to. It's going to be something different. It's going to bring new and unique things with it. I'm just thinking about a wedding that I was privileged to be able to attend during all of this. And one of the most hilarious moments was people having to mute their lines, right? And helping the people who weren't great with technology. I mean, those are things that will be memorable. And maybe that's the bigger takeaway here, is that just because we're doing it differently doesn't mean it won't be memorable, that it won't feel like connection. And then I think the other piece, in addition to managing our own expectations, is to just keep your sense of humor about this. I think as much as we can go into this with a, you know what, we're all in this and it's rough, and it's teaching us some things. I think if we can just kind of keep our sense of humor about us, that's going to help us cope with these moments.
Trust me, I've been brushing up on my stand-up comedy skills isolated here. So,
Yeah.
so
Well, I was just going to say, I think what the other piece too is that if we can just laugh, like, I mean, I shared with you, Jackie, that I'm not home alone. I have two relatively small kids, and there's been a couple moments where they've kind of barged in on me for different things, and it's just kind of, you have to keep your sense of humor about it, versus expecting things to be perfect.
is there a danger in not having any of your events continue? You have happy hours, or you have, all these events that we planned, and just saying, no, I'm not going to do them virtually at all. I'm going to wait until this is all over and have the real deal in person.
Yeah, I mean, some people are going to opt to do that, right? And, I'm aware of a wedding that I was connected to that's been basically postponed a year, which, that sounds like it was what was best for the couple that was deciding. But I do think what's more important is that we continue to stay connected, that's really, so whether the big events are canceled, that we still keep kind of the small ways of connection. And we're really relying on technology to do that, because it's important. We're physically distancing, but we need to stay socially connected.
I think a new challenge that we're going to see is some sort of envy or guilt to other regions, and not being, we look at New York, where we're based, that's completely shut down, has all of its lockdowns pretty still tight. And then other regions where you're starting to see the potential of things loosening up, and you're going to watch people slowly get back into their day-to-day lives. How do we, if you are in a different situation, look at that unfold and not start building up this sense of anger or envy or, angst against other regions experiencing different things from you?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think, we would love it if places were less affected than where we are, right? But I do think, having those feelings is completely normal, and that we, as much as we shouldn't judge ourselves for any feelings we're having right now, they're all valid. None of us have faced this before or had to navigate something like this before. So I think that's one piece. But then the other piece is, I think, with different areas of the country having kind of different timelines, it does provide us some hope that areas that either were ahead of different, the West Coast kind of was ahead of the East Coast on this in terms of timing, we may be able to see what the future might look like for us. Not a perfect prediction, but it can give us hope that as we see areas starting to open up in a safe way, that may help us know a bit more of what might be ahead for us.
And how do you cope with guilt? I personally even feel that, the idea of lockdowns being lifted and thinking, oh, is it too soon? Oh, should I not do that? Am I contributing something bad? And I think we're all just kind of in this mindset of a little bit of fear, a little bit of guilt of not wanting to make it worse. How do you cope with that and not make it feel like it's all on your shoulders?
It's such a good question. I think anything we feel right now, we just have to kind of validate and try not to judge ourselves for, because like I said, we have no practice at something like this. This is new territory for all of us. I often think the best approach is to remind each other and ourselves that we're doing the best we can and that we're taking the precautions and what we need to do seriously, and to just kind of take each day as it comes. Like, I think what we're going to find with our feelings around this is that they're going to change. For some of us, they're changing hour to hour. They're changing based on what we read or who we talk to. And so if you're feeling kind of like, I'm having this feeling and it doesn't feel good, it's likely to change. And sometimes we just need to feel our way through it, literally. But to try not to judge ourselves too much about what we're feeling right now. We're all doing the best we can.
And on the same topic of fear, I know there's so many families. I know you're a mom with kids at home, and this can be such a complex topic to explain to somebody else who might not fully understand it. What is your best advice for explaining to someone who's younger, who may not understand the full gravity of the situation, but also minimize the amount of fear and, anxiety and complications that can come from, again, this idea of the unknown for a kid who's, in elementary school or middle school and can't really understand why we're not going outside and what's going to happen next, and not really able to fully engage in the conversations. How do you explain this to someone without inflicting fear?
Well, and I think this is a good rule of thumb for talking to anyone about this. I think you meet people where they are, and particularly with kids and younger kids, I think you meet them where they are. So, as they've had questions about things, I've tried to answer them without overloading them with everything I know, right? And there's a lot that we don't know right now. But I think also, thinking about what different priorities are, particularly when people are younger. So my daughter is in the kind of tween area, and for her, staying connected to her friends has been important. So we've made sure that as much as we can connect them virtually, and that's happening. For my son, it's been more about having access to the things he loves, and he's much younger, he's 6. So, again, I think meeting them where they are. And, one of the things I've been thinking about is how much we should be putting a priority on mental health over other things right now. And so, my benchmark for the day has been, as much as my kids seem as happy as they can be given the circumstances, that they seem like they're adjusting okay, I try not to judge it beyond that. And one of the things I did want to mention, for those that are kind of teens or are connecting with teens, we've worked on this campaign with the Ad Council and the JED Foundation called Seize the Awkward. And there's actually some new resources on that website related to talking about mental health in the time of coronavirus that I think will really resonate with teen audience. So that's at seizetheawkward.com /coronavirus. And because I think we're all navigating these questions of how do we talk to the people in our lives about what's happening, whether they're adults, teenagers, or young children.
We had a question from Twitter, and they asked, what if you're at super high risk and there is no question that you're not going to come out of quarantine for quite some time, and this idea that you might be missing out on the last interaction with, a loved one, or an event that just was a once in a lifetime thing, and the likelihood of you ever getting to partake in these things is slim to none, and you just feel this pressure of defeat for things that do have a value way beyond this year, way beyond 2020. They mentioned that word, I think defeat kind of says it all. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. Well, no, I think, and to certainly validate that these are disappointments, and that that we're having to adjust to a lot of things that we hoped would happen that aren't. One of the things I've been saying to folks is that, I think as human beings, we love ritual and ceremony, right? So if you think about things like graduations that aren't happening, weddings, or even some of the more poignant rituals around funerals and things like that aren't able to happen right now. Um, I think it's important that we find some way to have ritual, whether it's celebration rituals or remembering rituals. And we can do those in our own home. We can do them with other people via Zoom or other platforms. You know, Connecting to what these moments mean for us is super important right now. So, for example, if you're missing a graduation, finding a way to celebrate that, even if you're alone with your family, and just say, I did something really important and I'm going to celebrate that, versus focusing on I'm missing this and it's a once in a lifetime. I mean, that's the reality, but there are things we can do to still celebrate and acknowledge and memorialize some of the more important moments in our lives.
Yeah, finding that silver lining is important.
Absolutely. And it's different, right? I mean, I think a big piece of this is, forcing all of us to let go of what we thought things would be like and to accept what things are. And that's hard. I mean, I'm not saying that lightly. It's hard. But I think the more we do that and just say, okay, this is what it is, and I'm just going to do the best I can, and tune in with ourselves about that. I think we're going to be okay if we can just do that.
And on Instagram, we got a question about the longevity of this and how long our psyches can actually function in isolation. Is there a time where we kind of reach our limit and start mentally being affected, our psyche being affected by just being inside too long? Although I think you and I have discussed, this isn't new for some people.
Yeah. Well, and what's probably true is it's hard to know because we all have different thresholds, right? I mean, my extrovert friends are the ones who are always looking to connect right now because they're really missing that. Folks that are more introverted might find, you know what, the quiet's okay. And that we all have different individual thresholds. But what I would say is that just because we're physically distant, we still should be reaching out to connect. Whether it's calling, texting, forwarding something to someone, sharing on social media and connecting in that way. Because human beings are social beings. We like to connect with each other. So as much as we can keep that going right now, I think it's going to help us even if we're physically distant for some time.
I think the last question I want to ask you brings up the introvert versus the extrovert, which is something I've experienced with some of my friends and colleagues who I'm definitely an extrovert. That's been very clear to me throughout this whole process, but some of my friends aren't. And when they handle stress or anxiety, they kind of build this wall up and kind of block everyone out for a moment. So everything can be fine, conversations can be rolling, and then all of a sudden there's a span of 2 or 3 days where you don't hear anything. And that's their way of coping. But on the other side, on the flip side, where someone like me is happy to just say, here's how I feel. I feel X, Y, Z this very second, and need those people to respond. But also, as an extrovert, when they don't respond, it sends this little alarm like something's wrong. They're not okay. How can I help? How can I continue this conversation? Let's talk more. More words, the better. And that's where I'm seeing the introvert and the extrovert kind of butt heads and say, I don't cope the way you do. Where is that happy medium for both people to feel at ease? Because it seems like both standing their ground doesn't seem beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. And I think those individual differences are really coming out right now, even within households, right? And so I think a couple things. I think if you're worried about someone who might be isolating, in a way that's not good for them, that they're really cutting off contact and you're worried, say, about their mental health, I think the continued reaching out is important. I do also think, though, this is where communication is key. And rather than making assumptions, that we say to each other, hey, I really want to stay connected to you. What's the best way for us to do that? Because what I've noticed is we all have different ways of preferred communication. Some people prefer text, some people prefer to talk on the phone, some people like the face-to-face virtually interaction. And to really talk with someone openly about, hey, I want us to stay connected. How should we do that? How frequent? Right? So that if you're expecting a daily contact, the other person says, I'm good with once or twice a week, so that we're not disappointing each other inadvertently. I think the more we can just be open about that. And if you are worried about someone, I think it's okay to say, hey, you know what? I know you're by yourself right now. I'm concerned about how that's been for you, or I want you to know I'm here if you need anything. And then also making sure, if you're worried about somebody maybe being in crisis, that you share resources like the National Lifeline and other numbers with them, so that if they are alone or if they don't want to connect, they have another resource to connect.
Sure. Well, I think we covered so much today. I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation. I think this is something, like I said, we're seizing the awkward and talking about all these things that I think a lot of us are feeling. I know I'm feeling them. So I just really appreciate you joining me today.
I'm so glad to do it. Thanks, Jackie.
And of course, anyone who needs resources or needs support, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255 or contact the crisis text line by texting TALK to 741-741. Thanks for joining us.